Chris gave me this lecture deliberately to hurt me because he knows I don't like talking about this stuff. I'd much rather be up here talking about clinical topics, but it is something worth talking about. And what I mean by the path to insanity is synonymous with the path to mastery. And the way I conceptualize this is at the beginning of each year, I have a new group of residents, and I ask them at the beginning of that year, do you want to be excellent? And I ask them to raise their hands if they do. And they all raise their hands. And of course they should, because why attend an emergency medicine residency if you don't want to be excellent? But what I know in the back of my head is that very few of them actually will be. Maybe one or two each year. And I would argue I have one of the best resident classes anywhere. I would put my residents up against anyone. So it's not their failings. They're the best out there, I think. It's just that people don't understand that the pathway to mastery, the pathway to expertise, to excellence, is actually a pretty tough path. And so that's what we'll talk about first, is this path to expertise. Now, I want to put out a disclaimer so I don't sound like a twat. I'm only looking at this path from the very beginning, and maybe see a few steps ahead of me. And I need a lot more gray hair before I would ever sit here in front of you and claim mastery. But I'm going to lay out what I think is the path to get there, and at least the path I'm trying to walk. So the Dreyfus model was created by two brothers, and it's a way of actually seeing the pathway from the beginnings of learning a skill, a task, a profession, to true expertise. And they laid it out into 5 steps. The novice, well, they're just hopefully trying not to look stupid. That's all they want out of it. And in fact, if you take novices and you try to give them a whole bunch of training and knowledge, they can't conceptualize it. And when you look at them and you understand all they want is not to look dumb, then you start to appreciate and sympathize with the level they're at. And then you get to advanced beginner. And in advanced beginner, you gain the ability to solve problems, but they don't see the whole picture. They have that very narrow focus. They're just seeing what's in front of them, and they're not seeing how it fits into the big picture. And then you get competence. Now, when you're competent, you could start troubleshooting. You're resourceful. You take initiative. You really own the skill, the profession. And the step 1 above that is proficient. And when you're proficient, you gain reflection. You can self-improve. You don't need someone to tell you where you went wrong, because you actually have the ability to do it innately. And you can learn from others' mistakes as well. So essentially, this is the stage of metacognition. And this is wonderful, because once you get to here, you actually can be self-contained and continue to progress without necessarily needing outside influence. And then there's true expertise. And the mark of an expert is intuition. They're no longer helped by rules. In fact, they're hindered by them. And when you ask airline pilots to make rules for a situation that they're engaged in, rules that they think are very good, if they're experts, when you actually watch them in simulators doing the tasks of that exact situation, they will do something entirely different. They won't follow their own rules, because the rules are not for the expert. They're capable of invention on the fly. And now it's not clean cut, it's all a continuum, but you move from rules to intuition, from considering everything to having perfect focus on the situation, from being a detached observer to being part of the system. Now, here's the real problem. Most physicians stop at the level of competence. And the reason they do that is that's the level where you feel pretty good about your shifts. You're doing everything very well, very skillfully, and no one says anything negative about you if you're competent. You're doing a good job, but you're in a zone of stasis. And you can continue this way throughout your career. And in fact, I've met attendings, consultants who have just stopped at this level, and they do a fine job, but they're not moving forward. In other professions, it's even worse than in medicine. They stop at the level of advanced beginner. And there's a law out there that you'll get promoted to the level of your incompetence, which explains a lot about the frustrations you feel in everyday life when you're dealing with others, I should say. Now, competence doesn't equal excellence, is what I want to get across. That competence, feeling good, is actually a really bad place to stop. And you need to keep going if you want to actually achieve excellence. So let's talk about the domains of expertise. There's 3 I think you need to be an excellent critical care doctor. You need knowledge, skills, and thinking. And we'll start off talking about knowledge. And there's only one way to gain knowledge in my mind, and that's to read. And that's it. That's the only path to true expertise in critical care, is to read. Now, there's a whole bunch of crap bandied about learning styles, And thankfully, in the past 2 years, it's been thoroughly debunked. You're not an auditory learner. You're not a visual learner. You're not a haptic learner. It's all garbage. And the literature for that is on the EMCrit site. Everyone is capable of reading. And if you claim you're not, if you claim, oh, I don't learn things that well, it's because you're lazy. You absolutely could learn. You've gotten through medical school and residency. For God's sakes, you're capable of reading. But reading's hard. That's why people claim they're not capable of learning that way. Reading requires you to process the information. It's not processed for you. So what does reading do? Well, you get evidence, of course, and that's important for your clinical practice, but you also get viewpoints and the ability to critically think, and you get skills at processing, at translation, and you get tips that get translated to the bedside. So reading is, to use an Americanism, fundamental. Now, I read 60 journals a month. This is fucking insane. It's not sustainable. It's not a path I recommend, and yet I can't figure out another way because it kills me. It kills me that something might be written in my field that I don't get to see. Cliff Reed is the same way. And it is a path, but I don't think it is a good path. There you go. Now, I also try to read all the monographs out there, and it's not possible to do it. Now, Chris would tell you that you don't need to do that. You just dip your feet in the water. You just sit on the banks, and it's a nice balmy day, and you just let the water rush over your toes, and you feel really good. And when you have a little time, you pop in there and you read something, or you check out some podcast. And then, if you're busy, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Now, the problem with that is twofold. A, Chris is a hypocrite because he doesn't do anything like that, even though he extols the virtues of that on Life in the Fast Lane. He's a liar. And the other problem with that is it's too easy. If you feel at any point on this path, wow, this is pretty simple. I just read an article now and then, I get a little knowledge. You're not on the path anymore. It needs to be hard, and I will show you the evidence for that in a bit. If it doesn't feel hard, if it doesn't feel like you're having trouble keeping up, you're not doing enough. You're not moving down that path quickly. So don't dip your feet in the water. Jump in the river and try to drink it. That's what you need to do. Now, so to try to reconcile the insanity of what I do with a realistic path, I went to the Pareto principle. Now, the Pareto principle was by an economist, Joseph Juran, and what he discovered is that 20% of effort in most things yields 80% of the results. And that to get that last little 20% of results requires an enormous increased effort and might not be worth it. So if you could find the 20% that truly maximizes your benefits, then you could probably get away with that quite well. So to figure out how to use this 80-20 rule for the purposes we're discussing, I tried on the plane ride over here to take the 60 journals I read and narrow it down to the 12 that I think would get you 80% of the benefits if you're a crit care doc. And so this is the list I came up with. It's on the site, emcrit.org/smack, so you don't have to write it down. It's there for you. And this is for ED critical care doc. I'm sure these would shift slightly if you're mostly ICU or you're mostly anesthesia critical care. But I think if you did this, you'd be pretty good. And now just looking at this list, I cringe because I'm like, oh, but then I don't get to read that one and that one. But this is a pretty good start. Now, the question I got when I talk about these principles to people is, can't you just get there by experience? And the answer is maybe. First of all, the pop culture folks like Malcolm Gladstone will tell you need 10,000 hours. And that was based on some real, pretty good work in the cognitive psych literature. For a profession such as ours, where it's such a broad-based skill set, it's probably closer to 20,000 hours. And if you got that purely by experience, you might get to the path of expertise. But the pitfall is that many people don't get 10 years of experience in 10 years. They get 1 year of experience repeated 10 times, and that will never get you to expertise. If you're still not pushing yourself, then you're not going to get there. Now, the reason I say reading is the way to go is experience alone is just a set number of hours. But if you read beforehand and then experience something, it's multiplicative in its benefits, in its power. And if you take the time to read beforehand, see something, and then go back and actually read about it afterwards as well, that's exponential, the power that has. So much more than experience alone. Now, where does foam fit into this? This is what this conference is all about. Can't foam provide those hours of expertise? Can't foam be a way to transmit knowledge? And the answer is I don't think so. See, the way I see foam is transmitted experience. Foam is tacit knowledge. Foam is someone taking their knowledge and conceptualizing it, pre-digesting it for you, and it's immensely powerful. It's one of the most powerful things out there in medical education, but it is not a substitute for the reading. If you read and then happen to hear a podcast about what you read and then actually read all the things that were discussed afterwards, infinitely more powerful. Same thing for blog posts. So that's how I think of foam, is the same way I think of experience. The way I conceptualize it is, on the way over here, I saw this movie, The Cloud Atlas. Anyone see this? Yeah, it was an okay movie. It wasn't great. It has Tom Hanks, which is ridiculous. And then I think to this director's vision of this, and I think back to the book I had read by David Mitchell, which was lyrical and beautiful. And I think I don't see it the way the movie saw it. But luckily I had read the book first, and seeing the movie was very enjoyable because I had read that book, and I got to see another person's vision of how things could go. But if I just saw that movie, that wouldn't have been a good thing. So what the reading does, as opposed to foam, is that you actually are forced to process the information, to record it in a translated form, because you can't rewrite the entire article, but if you jot down in a notebook the key points you took from it, not only will that allow you to remember, but that act of actually recording, of processing, does amazing things for that knowledge. It's essentially like whether you want to eat on your own or have the mama chick feed you that little bit of pre-digested food. You don't want to do that. It's not as nutritious. So why? Why walk down this path of knowledge? Well, the reason is it actually inspires creativity, and that's very counterintuitive, because the way we think about creativity is the opposite of the bookish scholar, right? We think of the artist, this free spirit, who actually is not ensconced in the library reading. But I don't think that's true for any profession, art or medicine, but it's especially not true for ours. It's actually the knowledge itself that gives you the ability to be creative, the ability to, on the fly, come up with new ideas, new ways of doing things. You need that knowledge to be creative. Picasso needed to train on his skills on the canvas for years before he was capable of the creativity he demonstrated. It also gives intuition. When you have that moment in the department where, for no reason at all, the correct diagnosis comes to you, and you think it's a spark of light, it's not. It's the subconscious translation of the knowledge you've acquired over your entire career. And this has actually been demonstrated in the cognitive psychology literature. Insight is directly predicated on knowledge. And then the last reason to do this is that expertise is transferable. If you actually gain expertise in one domain, like critical care, it actually gives you the skill set to more rapidly acquire expertise in anything else you want to do. So for each of these sections, I want to give you additional reading, and these are on the show notes as well, emcrit.org/smack. These are the two books I recommend for the path to knowledge expertise: Pragmatic Thinking and Learning, and then an incredible book by Robert Greene called Mastery. All right, we discussed knowledge. Let's talk about skills, which are the sine qua non of a critical care doctor. You need to be able to do procedures. You need to be able to do them well and rapidly. My residents can't one-hand tie, and it drives me crazy. They're putting in a central line, and they're trying to two-hand tie with a needle on the end, and it's just dangerous. And it's because we don't send them on surgical rotations anymore, and so they're not forced to learn it. And each time I watch them doing a central line, I tell them, you have to go home in one-hand tie. There's 100 videos on YouTube. I'll happily show you myself, and then you just have to practice. When we were on our surgical rotations, we would just always be tying little pieces of silk around like doorknobs or chairs, and we'd do it incessantly. We deliberately practice it because we knew if we're in the operating room and we were not capable of tying, we'd get yelled at and we'd be made to feel this small. And so as a result, we were forced to practice. And my residents don't do that rotation, and they never learn to one-hand tie. They have to generate that within themselves if they want to learn it. There's nothing external doing it. But they should. We should want to master each procedure in our specialty and be able to do them at a level where we don't even have to think about it. It's the same thing with the Seldinger technique. We do it for so many procedures in emergency medicine. When I was an intern and learned to put my first central line in, I realized I have no motor control over this needle and wire. Things are moving about, the needle's leaving the vessel, and I have to stick them again, and it's horrible. So I took a clean kit, I took the needle and the wire home, and I practiced about 10,000 times until there was no way that needle was going to move a millimeter when I was putting that wire in and out of it. That's deliberate practice. That's what you need to do, is break each procedure in critical care into its actual micro skills and practice them until you are extremely good at it. But how many people actually do that? People think they're just going to learn on the job, and it's not possible. We don't see enough to make that happen. This deliberate practice is used by every other procedure-based profession or the sports teams. They're doing this always. This is what practice is for. For every game, they're practicing so many more hours than they're actually playing. We need to be doing this as well. So the axiom is, don't practice until you succeed, which is where most people stop. You have to practice until you can't fail, and that takes a lot more time. And then for procedures you're not going to be able to practice, my friend Cliff Reed would tell you, use the mental simulator, use visualization, and this is a great way to go. The first time I did an open tracheostomy in the operating room, I couldn't sleep for 9 days because every time I tried to go to bed, I'd keep picturing the procedure and running through it in my head because I just wanted to be able to never forget any step. That makes you better, especially if you've visualized it beforehand, done one, and then actually visualize it again. So much more powerful than just that one procedure alone, just like the knowledge realm. And then verbalize the procedures. Every procedure you do, you should be able to close your eyes, picture every little step of that procedure and be able to say it out loud. And if you can't do that, you don't know that procedure. Now, I looked for books on this that would actually take these concepts and put them in a form, in a monograph. I can't find one. If anyone knows it, put it on the Twitter stream. But what I do have is an incredible lecture by Mac Moyetti out of Maryland, and it's on, the link to it's on the EMCrit.org/SMAC page, and it's worth listening to. It'll change your entire vision of procedures. And then the last realm is thinking. We need to be critical thinkers if we're going to be true experts. We need to debug our minds. We need to get rid of the cognitive biases or the fallacious reasoning. That sounds so dirty. I don't know why. And so on the wall of my office, I have this poster of retological fallacies. And I look at it every day, and I try to avoid falling into any of these pitfalls. And when you actually are talking to registrars, if you're teaching them, point it out if they're actually falling into one of these, because you have to debug their minds as well. Now, who knows who this is? Chris, do you know? I don't know. Joe? That's Joseph Bell. And he was the master of observation, the master of mindfulness. He was able to look at a patient and instantly know their profession, how they got there, what happened that morning, what they had for breakfast the half hour before arriving. And he was notorious for his ability to do this. And it wasn't magic. It was because he was a mindful observer. He was the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes. He's what Conan Doyle was actually writing about because he had worked with Joseph Bell. That mindful observation is something we need to grasp and make part of our world. We need to observe everything. We can't be lazy. We can't use what Kahneman calls type 1 thinking, where we're actually falling into the trap of just letting our mind process things automatically without being really cognizant of what's going on. We have to be mindful observers, active observers. One of the paths to get there is actually meditation, and not in some crunchy spiritual fashion. The work's now been done, the functional MRIs, the PET scans. Meditation actually changes your brain. It actually changes your ability to be aware, to block out external stimuli. So, doing 5 or 10 minutes a day of just following your breath, besides being very relaxing, will actually make you better in the realm of critical care. 2 books I recommend for this part. Mastermind, in which a psychologist discusses Sherlock Holmes in the setting of cognitive psychology and the art of deduction. Fantastic. And then the best book I've read all year, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Now, there are potholes on this path. And Dreyfus, one of the Dreyfus brothers who made that path of expertise, said to become competent, you must feel bad. If you're not feeling bad, you're not really on the path anymore, as I said earlier. And this has been looked at as well. If you're feeling pretty good about yourself, if you're just kind of coasting, you're not getting better. Charles Darwin put it even better. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than it does knowledge. And this has actually been studied. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And these were two psychologists that looked at people who didn't know things. What was their level of confidence? And it was found the more ignorant they are, the higher their levels of confidence. And this is what's known as second-order incompetence. Have you ever worked with anyone in the hospital like this? It's usually, I'm not going to go there. And this unconscious incompetence is you don't know and you don't know that you know. And that's where you get the wrong and strong phenomenon, where you're actually being yelled at by someone you know doesn't know what they're talking about. Avoid that. And the way to do it is to never assume your own excellence. Just never assume it. Always think you're still at that advanced beginner stage and keep working, and then you'll never fall into that pit hole. Now, we've discussed the path to expertise. Let's finish off by discussing the path to mastery. Now, when you say the word master, it has all sorts of connotations. But the one I mean is this kind of master, the master and apprentice model. That's what I mean by mastery. It's teaching. It's the expert who actually could take that next step and actually teach others. That's what, in my mind, a master is. And it requires you to come full circle back to be getting conscious competence. We get to the point where we truly are getting good, where we don't even think about what we're doing anymore. It just happens naturally. It happens automatically. You have to go back and remember all the little steps it took you to get there, to be able to teach properly. Or else you make the assumption that even though you've worked at something for a dozen years and you're teaching someone 2 months in, that they should know things at the level you do. And it's a trap that I fall into sometimes. And then I have to stop myself and saying, I'm being a bastard. They're not supposed to be at this level. They're 10 years behind. So it requires patience, and it's hard, but it's so incredibly potent to be able to pass this on to others. So it's worth seeking that path. So that's what mastery is. It's expertise plus the ability to teach. Now, I will stop with a plea. We need to know more about all this. There's very little research going on within medicine on these things. We have tons of clinical research, and we're looking at medical education, but we're not looking so much at our own path to expertise and how to most efficiently get there. So I'll close by saying, consider walking the path to excellence. Do it for your patients, and do it for yourselves. Thank you.